physical mayhem is an art form, then the Three Stooges were true Renaissance masters. They didn't invent slapstick, but in their 50 years together, they churned out more variations of physical comedy than any other comedy act.
Let him alone.
Cut it out. This is the way, isn't it? Okay.
Down. I'm a victim of circumstance.
Who are you hitting?
Few comedians ever inflicted as much pain or inspired as much laughter as the Three Stooges. But all of this stooge mania didn't just happen overnight. In fact, it was in 1930, 60 years ago, that the original Stooges first graced the silver screen. The team was actually formed as a vaudeville act in 1925 by a stand-up comic named Ted Healy. Healy had grown up with brothers Shemp and Moe Howard of Brooklyn, and years later, when Ted decided to pursue a stage career, he called upon his old pal Shemp to help him out as a second banana, or as they were called in those days, stooge. Moe joined up shortly afterward. But Healy still wasn't satisfied. Insisting that three stooges are funnier than two, Healy began looking for yet another second banana. It was while Healy and the Howards were playing vaudeville in Chicago several months later that they acquired musician Larry Fine as the third member of the group. Larry had been working as a violinist in a song and dance act when Healy visited him backstage. Larry, who had just stepped out of a shower, was drying off with a towel. His wet, frizzy hair was literally standing on end, giving him the appearance of an enraged porcupine. It was then that Healy offered Larry $90 a week, and even $100 if he'd get rid of the fiddle, to join up as a stooge. And thus, the Three Stooges were born. Several years and hundreds of vaudeville dates later, Ted Healy and his Three Stooges were signed by Fox Studios in Hollywood to star in their very first theatrical motion picture, Soup to Nuts, in 1930. The film was so successful that the Stooges split with Healy. As a matter of fact, Shemp Howard eventually went out on his own as a solo comedian, and he began co-starring in films for the Vitaphone Pictures Company in New York. Shemp's first solo comedy, titled In the Dough, was a vehicle tailor-made for that 1920s version of John Candy, the irrepressible Fatty Arbuckle.
Hey, what do you think you're doing?
I'm making bread.
Well, that ain't the right way to make bread. This dough's too thin.
Sure it's too thin. If it wasn't, you couldn't do that with it.
Certainly.
Well, why can't you do that with it?
Meanwhile, Moe and Larry had rejoined with Ted Healy. The act was more popular than ever, and the foursome, along with Ted's girlfriend, Bonnie Bunnell, were signed by MGM Studios for a series of musical shorts and guest appearances in feature films. Taking Shemp's place was his baby brother, Jerome Howard. Young Jerome had neither the frizzy hair of Larry Fine nor the long, limp mop shared by Moe and Shemp. The solution? Shave all the hair off. And with one fateful haircut, Jerome became Curly Howard. He made his screen debut with the Stooges in Hollywood on Parade in 1932.
I get it. Yeah. Say, Ben, it's just you and I, so I'll buy a drink. Just nobody at the bar, so you...
Nobody, it's you and I.
How are you, boys?
Okay, I'll take Scotch and soda.
You will, eh? None of that nonsense.
Oh, listen, I beg your pardon.
Because-
Please, I beg you. But I know how you make people laugh.
You do, huh?
Yes, I said.
How? Uh-huh. No, you're wrong, lady. She's wrong, isn't she?
Yeah, this is the way.
Take your time.
He's
kid.
wrong. This is the
Relax
way.
yourself. Do that again. Do that again.
It's hook. He's wrong.
Now, this is the way, isn't it? Okay. Pardon me.
Who started this thing here? Wait a minute.
By 1933, Ted Healy was already on his way to becoming a major star at the MGM Studios.
Why does she always call me a gorilla? Ain't I a man like everybody else? No.
The Stooges, however, were just along for the ride, making less than a tenth of the income boss Healy was pulling down, but getting most of the laughs. A showdown was inevitable. Moe Howard, who had by now more or less assumed the role of off-screen boss of the Stooges, told Healy the trio was going off on its own. Healy bid them goodbye, and the Three Stooges became an independent comedy team for good in 1934. As soon as word got out that the Stooges and Healy were no longer together, Moe, Larry, and Curly were immediately offered a film contract with Columbia Pictures. Officially out of work and fearful of their future, they leaped at the opportunity and signed on the dotted line. The Three Stooges would wind up working for Columbia for the next quarter of a century. The boys were ecstatic about their new future as bona fide movie stars. After working as second bananas for nearly a decade, it was exciting to be out on their own. It was also scary. In addition to Moe's fear that they'd never make the big time, the boys quickly realized they had very little of their own comedy material. Everything they did before was built around Healy. In their early years at Columbia, Moe, Larry, and Curly simply reworked old routines they had performed with Ted, with Moe more or less taking Healy's place as the leader and/or bully of the group.
Then he pokes his coconut into the thing like that. Then he says, I'll squeeze the cider out of your Adam's apple. Then he gives him the works like this. And he keeps turning and twisting. That, ladies and gentlemen, is...
What's the matter? You want to kill me?
In addition to numerous personal appearance and vaudeville dates throughout the country, in short order, the boys were churning out 8 films a year for Columbia Pictures. Many of these were incorporated into a hugely successful feature film titled Stop, Look, and Laugh, 3 decades later.
Hey, don't look now, but I think we're about to be killed.
By the mid-1930s, the Three Stooges were in full swing. Moe, Larry, and Curly were quickly becoming the stars of Columbia's short subjects department, and they were making more movies per year than any other comedy team in show business. But the Gentlemaniacs weren't the only ones to get in on the act. Former stooge Shemp Howard, who was Healy's original second banana back in the 20s, also formed his own act, called, appropriately enough, Shemp Howard and His Stooges. By the late 1930s, there were so many Ted Healy Stooges working, it was hard to keep track of who was beating up whom, whether physically or at the box office. Clearly, the biggest moneymaker of them all was the trio of Moe, Larry, and Curly. Still, the boys wanted to get out of short subjects and grab the big time of feature films. Just when it looked like they might have a shot, tragedy struck the Stooges in 1946, when Curly Howard suffered a debilitating stroke at the age of 43. He was forced into retirement, and it looked like the Three Stooges might wind up as just another footnote in motion picture history. But Curly's brother Moe refused to let the act die that easily. Almost immediately, he met with Columbia Pictures management and began searching out a replacement for his ailing sibling. After months of auditioning practically every slapstick vaudevillian in the country, Moe decided there was only one man in show business who could pick up where Curly left off and do justice to the third stooge persona, Curly and Moe's brother, Shemp Howard. As it turned out, Shemp was already under Columbia's contract, and as a favor to Moe and former partner Larry Fine, Shemp agreed to rejoin the Stooges. The new trio of Moe, Larry, and Shemp continued making films for Columbia for the next decade. Shemp quickly established himself as a completely different kind of stooge, and the better Shemp episodes stressed funny situations and clever writing, rather than goofy farce and unbelievable gags. But occasionally, the Shemp character itself was the centerpiece of the action, as in Brideless Groom, produced during Shemp's first year back with the team. This film, more than any other, showcases Shemp Howard's abilities as a character comic, as in this next scene, where Shemp plays Professor Shemp Howard, and he gives a music lesson to a particularly awful student.
Now, you see, Miss Dinkelmeyer, that's the way it should be sung. Shall we try it again?
I'll try anything for you, Professor.
Oh, that's fine, fine. If you please, Doctor. Doctor. Doctor! Oh! Hey! No, you are too fortissimo, too allegro, too quantro.
Oh, is that bad?
It ain't good. You're supposed to be singing about the voices of spring, not the eruption of a volcano. Give with the throat, not with the bellows.
Oh, Professor, you want it more like a bird.
That's it. Give me the bird. Oh. Look. I oughta. You oughta what? I oughta be a little more careful.
Shemp was careful, all right. Careful to play his character in such a way so as not to be compared with Curly. Occasionally, when in the hands of an unsympathetic director, Shemp was asked to ape Curly's style and mannerisms. But even when he was playing somebody else's character, Shemp could still wring major league laughs from just about any situation.
Wise guy, this time I'll close your... Oh, no. I'm sorry, Mo.
Oh, think nothing of it.
Oh, gee, thanks. Hey, you're welcome.
It was clear that all-out sight gag comedy was still the Stooges' stock and trade no matter what the personnel. And in the late 1940s, the boys brought their physical mayhem to television with a series of guest appearances on popular variety programs.
Prepare for the double zinger.
With both television and the movies providing double paychecks, the Stooges were hotter than ever. So hot that, for the first time in decades, Mo Howard felt he could afford to take some time off and enjoy a trip around the world with his wife. But shortly after his return, tragedy again befell the Stooges. In November of 1955, just before the boys were scheduled to crank out some more films, Shemp Howard suffered a heart attack and died.
We better do something fast.
Yeah.
Mo and Larry considered continuing the act as the Two Stooges, but even they realized it would never work without a third man. Once again, they sat down with Columbia executives and tried to come up with yet another patsy comic. They found one in Joe Besser. In 1955, burlesque veteran Besser, seen at the left, was under contract at Columbia, doing his own short subject series. He'd even worked with Shemp Howard, seen with the glasses, just a few years earlier. Shortly after Shemp's death, Besser was inducted into the trio, and the Three Stooges were back in business. But Besser had become famous to millions of TV fans through his work on the Abbott and Costello series in the 1950s. His obnoxious, effeminate character was a perfect complement to the non-stop bantering of Bud and Lou.
You can't draw, can you? You know you couldn't. Why'd you bring me away out here? Now what am I going to do? What am I going to do with the boats I was going to buy, the buildings I was going to buy? Where are you going with the water?
Oh, my cat's on fire!
Well, what have you got to say for yourself?
The trio of Howard, Fine, and Besser turned out a handful of films between 1957 and 1959, many of which were remakes of earlier Stooge comedies. Just as the boys figured they were good for a few more years at Columbia, the studio's short subjects department was suddenly disbanded. Even Mo Howard kicked around the possibility of folding up the act. It looked like his dream of the Stooges making the big time in features was over. Mo even began looking into producing movies for other performers and tried his hand at solo stand-up comedy as well. Just when it looked like Mo Howard would round out his career telling hokey stories on hokier talk shows, fortune smiled on the Stooges. Columbia Pictures had released their old short subjects to television as a kiddie TV program. Within weeks of the film's nationwide release, the Three Stooges were back in demand. In fact, by 1959, the original Stooges were more popular than they had ever been in the 30s and 40s. By this time, however, Besser was back working in feature films as a solo performer. That left the boys with the problem of finding another comedian for the musical chair role of Third Stooge. Joe DeRita, a fat burlesque comedian, was brought to the Stooges' attention. After a couple of tryout nightclub dates, DeRita, nicknamed Curly Joe, became a full-fledged member of the team.
I know where you're trying to go. I don't...
come on now. What's the matter with you? You act as though you never saw a pretty girl before.
Yeah, Mo's right. If you've seen one, you've seen them all.
Well, when I've seen them all, I'll let you know. Here, now.
By 1959, the Stooges' popularity was front-page news, and Columbia was prompted to star them in a feature-length movie, Have Rocket Will Travel. And as a result, the Stooges rocketed to kiddie matinee stardom.
Oh, no! What's this? Oh, my, not them. Yes, it's the Three Stooges who are making history, all right, but laugh history in their first full-length feature motion picture, Have Rocket Will Travel.
What's wrong, things, Alice? Duck! Try to contact Earth.
The success of Have Rocket Will Travel was such that Columbia signed the Stooges for a complete series of feature-length comedies. At an age when most men are contemplating retirement, the boys were working harder than ever. They even turned in a cameo appearance in Stanley Kramer's extravaganza, It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. But the Stooges brand of comedy turned up in more than just feature films. They found themselves in great demand for TV appearances of all kinds, from guest shots on variety shows to network commercial spots, like their 1959 pitch for Simon Eye's Wax.
Mo, we got it.
You got what?
We found a way to put Simon Eye's car wax and Simon Eye's car cleaner all in one push-button can.
And just how does it work, Professor Nitwit? Come on, we'll show you.
Come on, we'll show you.
Come on,
Such was the Stooges' success on television that they even financed their own syndicated cartoon series, produced by Moe's son-in-law, the talented Norman Maurer. Titled The New Three Stooges, these 5-minute featurettes were highlighted by live-action wraparounds showcasing the flesh and blood Stooges.
Thank you. Introducing Eagle Eye, the sharpshooter.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This is my first trick. I will...
Please. Thank you. He will now show his skill and accuracy by shooting 2 balloons, the red one and the green one, from the hands of fearless Frizzletop. The pistol? Pistol. Right up here, right up there.
Oh, yes.
This way, please. Right, there he is. Now, which one are you going to shoot first, the red one or the green one?
The white one in the middle.
Hey, wait a minute, that's me. Yeah, we know that. It's every man for himself. Fire!
By the mid-1960s, the Stooges were the cream, make that whipped cream of show business. They had conquered virtually every medium and had achieved success beyond their wildest dreams. Moe Howard, in particular, relished that success. During the shooting of one film in 1965, he threw an elaborate barbecue for the cast and crew at his home in the Hollywood Hills. The Stooges were truly in their salad days. Moe's only regret was that his brothers Curly and Shemp weren't around to enjoy the success. But Moe was anything but mellow. He was more energetic than ever when the boys made what turned out to be their last movie, The Outlaws Is Coming, in 1965.
Where's Sheriff? I hear Rance Roden has sent for his gunslingers to get Mr. Cabot, and that's 9 of the meanest, orneriest galoots who ever cheated the gallows, and every one a dead shot.
That was the West it was, where a man's life was worth less than a horse parked over.
After the Stooges completed The Outlaws Is Coming, they met with producer Norman Maurer, seen standing, to begin pre-production on a series of comedy travelogues for television to be titled Kook's Tour. Halfway through filming of the travelogue project, Larry Fine was felled by a stroke which rendered him unable to perform. The project was eventually scrapped, as was the act known as The Three Stooges. Now well into his 70s, Moe just didn't have the energy to meet with potential performers for the middle stooge role. Larry died of another stroke in early 1974, and Moe Howard succumbed to cancer just a few weeks later. With the original members gone, any hopes of resurrecting the Stooges died with them. It was truly the end of an era.
Let him alone. Oh, man.
60 years after their first film, the world is still crazy about the Stooges, and it doesn't look like that's going to change in the very near future. It's safe to say that of all the comedy teams of Hollywood's golden era, the Three Stooges have surfaced as the most enduringly popular. That's saying a lot for a comedy team that thought they'd never made the big time.